life, the McCons have always believed that their daughter Christina would marry a fair and honorable man, if not rich and influential. She was beautiful after all. But when they met the man she was dating named Jack Kettlewell, something was very off about him. Maybe it's the haircut, or maybe he's just too pretty. No, maybe it's his best friend Ronald, who's always standing too close. Wherever the couple is, Ronald's there. It's not like Christina is running out of options. She probably had a dozen other suitors. But the girl was head over heels for Jack Kettlewell. No wonder she agreed to marry him right away. But only 9 days after their wedding, she would be found dead near her husband's best friend's burning cottage. Hey, my name is Detective Maple. If you like true crime stories and unsolved mysteries, hit that subscribe button because I'm here to bring tons your way. So drape your blanket over your head and let's get spookin'. On August 7, 1925, a baby girl named Christina Cecilia McCon was born to her Polish immigrant and devoutly Catholic parents, Casimir and Mary McCon. She grew up in Toronto, Ontario, and took up a job at the bank where she was said to be an ideal employee. When she brought home her then 26-year-old boyfriend, an Army veteran named Jack Kettlewell, the parents right then and there were shaking their heads. For the McCons, nothing could be worse than having your daughter date someone who is not a Roman Catholic. Another odd thing that they noticed is that he's too close with his best friend, a northern Italian immigrant by the name of Ronald. Ronald is a jack of many trades. He used to have a construction business, then he ventured out to insurance. He got into hairdressing, but by the time of this story, he's a professional dancer. The friendship of Jack and Ronald was a bit unconventional. If you were meeting your girlfriend's parents or family once in a while, you don't usually bring your best friend. Sure, maybe he's his chosen family. Regardless, it made the parents disapprove of Christina and Jack's relationship. Despite her family's nagging, 22-year-old Christina was in love, so they decided to get married. If you look at the photographs of Jack Kettlewell, he looked like a perfect match for Christina. This could have been a happy ending. 2 young people got married, probably started popping out children soon, raised them, and retired. Like any other newlyweds, they go on a honeymoon for the usual things, to take advantage of their burning love and get to know each other on a much deeper level. The destination? That isolated cottage owned by his best friend Ronald that's only reachable by boat in Severn Falls, Ontario. But guess who decided to be the third wheel? Give it up for Ronald. To him, why shouldn't he? He owned the cottage after all, which is a nice gift to the newlywed couple. But being there all the time is either telling the two that 1, you don't trust them with the property, or 2, you wanted to fit yourself into their marriage so badly. One afternoon, after sunbathing by the Severn River, Ronald goes back to his house at about 6:30 p.m., only to find it engulfed by fire. He managed to enter the establishment and find his unconscious best friend Jack. Christina, on the other hand, is nowhere to be seen. Later that day at 9 p.m., her body would be found face down on the riverbanks 150 feet from the cottage. The initial autopsy did not suggest any signs of struggle or foul play. They would later detect the drug codeine in her and Jack's system. Despite the water only being 9 inches deep, her official cause of death would be drowning. Ronald provided information suggesting that Christina tried to murder her husband and then herself. Aside from his account that she was acting moody and emotional on their honeymoon, he had 3 letters from Christina to prove it. Let's take a look at the contents of the letters she allegedly wrote. The first 2 letters were given to Ronald, about her not being sure of Jack's love for her. She mentioned that if she could not have him, no one else could. If he did not love her back, she would rather take her life in his. The letters would say, "This will be the best way out as I cannot bear the thought of another girl having him. When you love someone, you really love him, and I know there is no one for me but Jack. And if I cannot have him, I don't intend anyone else to. As you might say, I waited in the hope that Jack would ask me to marry him, but I now realize that I might just be a passing fancy." The third letter, containing a cryptic message, was sent to Mrs. Thomas, the landlady of an apartment the Kettlewell couple briefly stayed at. It said, "Ronnie is in the boat outside somewhere. By the time he gets back, everything will be all over with. He must be afraid something would happen because he is staying an extra day to make sure we go back to Toronto with him." When these letters were turned into the police, it was examined by handwriting experts to determine if these were authentically from her. They stood by the fact that it was indeed her handwriting. Today, the credibility of handwriting analysis is not that plausible, much more in the 1950s, so there were still doubts if she actually wrote the letters herself. But a more doubtful fact is that according to Ronald, all of these were given to him. Even the letter addressed to the landlady, who he barely knew by the way, was sent to him by Christina to mail it out himself. And suspiciously, as the house was burning, Ronald made sure to keep these 3 letters out of the fire, which so conveniently happened to be the only explanation for the incident. As he was the first to find the scene, and possibly because of the odd behaviors and choices of Ronald Barry, the police brought him to the station for an interview. He denied any involvement in the crime, but the police had good reasons to suspect him. For one, before their wedding, Christina and Jack both took a $5,000 life insurance policy. This would even be doubled if the death or deaths were accidental, which, side note, is a very odd promo for widows. Ronald, on the other hand, is not married, but he took out a $5,000 insurance on his property with Jack as his beneficiary. So, if Christina or Jack die accidentally, try guessing who would get the payout of a whopping $150,000 in today's money. You guessed it, Ronald. Too conveniently, because of something or someone, the cottage burned down, Christina is dead, and Jack nearly died. In his inquest, Ronnie mentioned that he had gathered money from his friends amounting to $12,000 to lend to Christina Kettlewell in 1946. This is to silence the 5 men who were trying to blackmail her about her own assault, like she was the one who's supposed to be ashamed. Theory suggests that Ronald killed Christina to get his money back. Other theories suggested that the 3 were in a polyamorous relationship, which may be acceptable nowadays, but very unusual in the 50s. Did Ronald Barry get jealous enough of Christina that he was willing to kill her? People have speculated that the letters that Ronald said were from Christina were actually fabricated by him and reflected his feelings about his and Jack Kettlewell's relationship. Number 1, he loved him so much that he could not bear seeing him with another girl. And number 2, if he cannot have him, no one else could. So he started building the twisted narrative, setting up Christina to be the jealous, homicidal wife instead of him. That is also why Christina was found without her wedding ring, and it would never be found. As for Jack Kettlewell, who survived the incident and was questioned by the police, he allegedly admitted to having a romantic relationship with Ronald. He would later deny this, saying that the confession was coerced by the police, but admit to it again later on. If he and Ronald loved each other, why would he marry Christina, knowing that it could cause trouble? I guess we'll never know. There were also speculations that the 3 of them initially planned to fake death and burn the house for insurance. That's why Christina wrote these suggestive letters to Ronald and Mrs. Thomas. They would move to a different city or country with the money and start a new life thousands of dollars richer. However, somewhere in the middle of the planning, the 2 men decided to turn against Christina and proceeded to actually kill her so they would only have to split the money among themselves. While Ronald and Jack were suspicious in the police's eyes, there was no DNA or physical evidence because the crime scene was burned to the ground. Because of this, Christina's case went ice cold. Meanwhile, Ronald and Jack were having the time of their lives signing autographs in the inquest in Bracebridge, Ontario. Jack will remarry years after Christina's death. He would never mention Christina to his new wife because imagine telling your spouse, "Hey, I'm actually married before, but my first wife either tried to kill me, killed herself, or was murdered for fraud. What do you want for lunch?" Their child, by the name of Richard, would marry a woman by the name of Sharon. Decades later, Sharon would learn about Christina Kettlewell's case while reading about their family history, but she would never mention this to her in-laws. As for Ronald, he moved to New York and disappeared without a trace. Christina Kettlewell's death and its endless possibilities of hows and whys has puzzled the public for decades. Whether she perpetrated her own death or was a victim of a heartless crime, we will never know. Do you think Christina was a possessive wife who became unhinged as she and Jack struggled with sobriety? Or was she a naive pawn to the schemes of people she trusted? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. In the next story, Ali Akbar was not your typical seller. He's not selling the regular stuff you see online. He was selling a mummy that he allegedly found in Persia. Find out how everyone watched the uncovering of what a 2,500-year-old princess in her coffin has to tell the world. Until then, Puppet out!